Mr. William Shatner.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, here we are, huh? It's not that cold. Yes, it is. So, the question is, how do you start off? What do you do to warm the audience up? So you look at me and say, gosh, she's gotten old. So I'm sort of familiar with the Indianapolis area. 15 years ago today, I got married in Lebanon, a little north of here. It was, I did want to get married, and my wife's family lives in Brownsville. And so I'd been in the area visiting sometime before that. Anyway, we didn't want to get married in Los Angeles with the press and everything like that. So my wife said, well, why don't we go to where I went to school, near where I grew up, and we'll go to Lebanon and get married. So we found out the hours that the Lebanese City Hall was open, like 9 to 4. So at 3:45, we drive into Lebanon, and like many small towns, the City Hall's in the center of a square, and steps lead up to it's like nice, and the square, the block, the 4 blocks, all have shops there. It's the center of the town. So we go in. And there's one young lady who's a clerk at the City Hall, and we have to sign all these documents, like who you are, what your past is, what your blood. I mean, it's just an extensive list of questions for the marriage thing. So we make it all out, we hand it in, and we walk out, and we're married, civilly married. Oh, God, nobody knows. We've snuck one over everybody. We walked down the stairs, and I said, why don't we just walk around the 4 blocks to see Lebanon? So we walked along the 4, looking at the shops. It's 5, it's 5 minutes after we've been there 15 minutes. So we've 5 minutes to walk around. And we come to the steps that we had mounted, and there comes the clerk, the young lady clerk that we had signed. She's running down the stairs. And she was awesome. There she is running down. We just noted she was running, and my telephone rings. Take my telephone out of there. And it's my agent in Los Angeles. And he said, I hear you got married. How'd you know? It's been 7.5 minutes since I've been married. Oh, it's all over television. There's a young lady who called the television thing in Lebanon and said, look what I got. A marriage certificate, and Shatner got married, and so it was before I had made the tour of the 4 blocks. The reporters had it, and the additional story to that is we intended to have the religious ceremony at their house, at my in-laws' house, which is a farm with no fence, so there was some press so we had to escape the farm, and it became a cloak and dagger thing until we ended up in Elizabeth's sister's home, and it was ridiculous. It was just chaotic and terrible, and all because this clerk decided to. So we got married again the following year in actually just to bore you with one more instance, since the minister did the thing in her sister's house, we were out of the county where we had signed the civil. So some of you know that what we didn't know. So for a year, we thought we were married, but apparently you have to have the civil and religious ceremony in the same county to stay married. So we weren't married for a year. We were living in sin for a year. All because of Lebanon. You know. I hate Lebanon. That's my Lebanese story. Then, okay, so Los Angeles doesn't have a football team. Okay? I'm bereft because I used to play and I love, and the Rams left and Oakland Raiders, the Raiders left, and we don't have a football team. So the Colts were a natural thing. I mean, Lebanon and the farm, and Indianapolis is our team. And Peyton Manning is old. He's an old guy. And I love old guys. So Peyton Manning was my guy. So when the Colts let Peyton Manning go, were you as outraged as I was? That was bizarre. The man made the team. He's the greatest football player ever. So I followed him to the Broncos. Right. But when Andrew Luck came here and I followed Andrew Luck, I was really torn because there was a young guy and an old guy. I went with the old guy, intending to go with the young guy when the old guy retired. So in the playoffs, when I saw Peyton look down the field knowing he could have run, and he threw instead of running, and he didn't complete the pass, and it was really awful, I thought, inside Peyton's mind is, I'm getting too old to run. And I thought, okay, when he lost the playoffs, I thought he would retire. I'm hearing he's coming back. So I've got one more season with the Broncos before I come back. So the real question is, what are we all doing here? I wrote a book called Get a Life. And in the book, well, I did my due diligence in the book, and I went around to people to interview them. What are you doing here? But I wouldn't get a straight answer if I went over to, Johnny over there and said, Johnny, I'm Shatner, and I'd like to ask you a question. Oh my gosh, and he'd say anything. I came here to see you or somewhere. So I went around in a mask. And I disguised my voice. Hi there, what are you doing here? And invariably they said, oh, is that you, Shatner? But eventually, I interviewed people. Why are we laughing? What is it? What? Camera monitor. It went like that. Oh. Is he drunk? So, I interviewed a kid, for example, young man, who was psychotically shy. He couldn't speak. Just too shy to speak, too shy. But he had a cat. And he dressed the cat up in the captain's uniform. And then he could speak. And he'd be very verbal. He'd talk, he'd flirt, he'd make friends with him when he had the cat. When he didn't have the cat, couldn't speak. It was wild. I interviewed a girl who had multiple personalities. All of them Star Trek. Out would emerge the Doctor, Spock, I think, and then when she did some fun things, she'd be the captain. It was weird. And I came to the conclusion in the book that what people do when they come to these conventions is they come to see each other. That was the thought. That was the conclusion I had in the book. So some years later, not so long ago, I did a documentary. I filmed the documentary, which I called Get a Life. Good. Three people saw my documentary. So, in the documentary, I got a guy, a professor of something, not quite remember what it was, and it was his thesis that what we're doing here is mythological, that mythology seeks to explain, because the human brain is wired for explanation. What's happening here? So, for example, mythology. For example, the Greeks, 2,500 years ago, had a mythology in their civilization. They had the gods that lived on Mount Olympus, way, way in the distance, but then they also had another group of semi-human-like, but they were giants that warred with the gods. And now we understand that the Greeks, going around finding dinosaur bones, would find these huge bones, and unlike our explanation that they lived 150 million years ago, they didn't know. They found these giant bones. So they had to make up stories to explain what these huge bones were, and they invented, in their mythology, a race of giants as an explanation of this mysterious thing that they couldn't figure out. Now they could understand it. Okay, it was a race of giants that lived here. They warred with the gods and all that. We're in the middle of the greatest mysteries of all. This civilization, us right now. Like, what the heck? Are there UFOs up there? Oh yeah. And if they are, where do they come from? And why do they keep landing in the floor of the swamp? Why don't they land on the lawn at the White House and talk to the president instead of capturing some guy said, I was captured by a UFO. Why would the UFO want him? So we start to invent explanations, which is our science fiction explanations. Science fiction is seeking to explain what we don't know. The speculation of writers about, are there other civilizations? But the mystery is even more profound than that. There's a guy by the name of Dr. Johnny Mack. Dr. Johnny Mack, who was, he's dead now, a tenured professor of psychology, psychiatry, I think, at Harvard University, okay, as part of his credentials. He won a Pulitzer Prize for writing a book on Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence. Won a Pulitzer Prize. He was a well-known, apparently a wonderful psychiatric doctor. So, some 10 years ago, a friend of his, another doctor, says, John, I've got this caseload of people who claim to have been captured and taken aboard spaceships. I got so many I can't handle. Would you help me with this caseload? And Matt says, okay. He starts to have appointments with people who claim to have been commandeered and then brought up to the spaceship and examined them. And he does 200 interviews as a case study. And he writes eventually 2 books in which he concludes UFOs exist. UFOs exist. This great doctor. How could he say that when they keep landing in the swamps of Florida? There's another book out there that I'm reading for the second time through called The Dancing Woolly Masters. Anybody know that book? Don't miss that book. Don't miss it. It's incredible. It's a sort of explanation of quantum physics. Quantum physics. Sort of new. The name has been around for 20, 30, maybe some more years, but nobody quite delved into it until comparatively recently. Quantum physics. There is a moment in quantum physics that states that it's possible that the examination of some phenomenon that's very small, by the very act of examining it, you bring it to life. And when you stop examining it, it goes away. It winks in and out of reality. I mean, what is reality? It brings into question everything. Is it possible that Johnny Mack, in examining those people who claim, and it was the similarity to the claims that bothered Mack, made him conclude that UFOs exist, is it possible that those people brought the UFOs into existence? And then when they stopped thinking about it or examining it, it went away? We don't know. But science fiction is part of that mythology. And that's what we're doing here today. How do you like that? Those are wild, wild ideas. But so's everything else. Just our existence. The fact that we exist is a wild idea. Okay, so now I'm open to questions that I may or may not answer, okay? I mean, I'll do my best to answer it, but sometimes the search is more interesting than the answer, because sometimes I don't have an answer. So I'll take a question. Anybody set up for a question? Guys, find somebody.
What was it like to be on an episode of The Twilight Zone?
What was it like to be on an episode of The Twilight Zone? Well, the practical answer. See, here's where I think answering it is not as interesting as the truth. The practical answer is, doing a television show for an actor is, you come on the stage, you've learned your lines at home, okay? And the director says, all right, you sit in the chair, and then you sit in this chair, and we'll have this guy, he's a Czechoslovakian acrobat. We're going to put him in a little fur suit, and we're going to stand him over there on the other side of a window, and you'll pretend that he's on the wing of a jet. Really? So, in 3 days, we do that. And it becomes one of the more popular Twilight Zone. So there's two things attached to that. First of all, it gets very popular. Whatever it was, at 27,000 feet. And the other thing is, my kids saw it, and every time we got on an airplane, when they were young, my kids would say, Dad, do the look. So, I pretend to be looking out the window, and they would call the stewardess, hey, would you mind coming over here, please? My father is seeing something. And I'd be looking at the window, and I'd turn to her and go,
yes.
That's how I brought my kids up. So there's that aspect. But what's the deeper question on that? So the deeper question is, this inherent fear when that plane goes up is that we shouldn't be there. I mean, if we were meant to fly, we'd have wings, sort of thing. What's keeping that airplane up? And when it gets bumping, it feels like it's not going to stay up. And so this little guy on the wing, who was a Czechoslovakian acrobat in a furry suit, you'd think they'd have gotten a better aerodynamic suit. But it was like a little bear, you know? And and I'd say, "You okay, Gustav?" You know, and it's hot in here. It's hot. That's the reality of shooting it. But the magic that all these years later, that you in this audience on a cold Saturday afternoon asked me a question about Twilight Zone is as magical as anything else, as quantum mechanics. It's just it's a miracle that a show like that lasts that long, and you're there to ask me that question. It's really fun. That's it.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, Will.
Hi, dear.
What's it like for you to see Chris Pine taking up the role of Kirk and leading this generation into the final frontier?
I burn with envy. Well, you know, it's great, and there was a moment when I was on a horse with Patrick Stewart. I was shooting a movie. I think it was the 6th movie that we were doing some years ago, and I had to say, like, the ship is yours now, or something to that effect. That really was like, wow, I'm handing this torch over here to Patrick Stewart on a horse. and Patrick is this wonderful actor, this marvelous guy, good buddy of mine now, and I've been riding and competing on horses. Come to the Indianapolis State Fair, by the way, to the riding here, to the competition, the saddlebred competition every year for many years. There's a great saddlebred competition that takes place in September every year, and I'm here because my horses compete, and sometimes I'm in the middle of it myself. So I've had some experience on horses. So we had to spend this day together, Patrick and I, on a horseback. And I knew from endurance riding that you can rub your legs raw if you don't have some protection. And indeed, one 25-mile endurance race I did, I had blood in my boots from rubbing my legs raw. And I had learned how not to do that. So I said, Patrick, we're going to be spending the day on horses. So I can pass this on to you. This is what I'm going to do. You can do it or not. I'm going to wear women's hose, silk stockings, attached to my thighs, in order to avoid the chafing of a whole day riding on a horse. He said, well, I think I'll do that too. So he emerged from his dressing room with the pantyhose on the outside of his pants. No, Patrick, inside. So, what was the question? What was it like watching Chris Pine? Okay, so Chris Pine, I did an interview of Chris Pine. I was doing another documentary of something. What was I doing? The Captains. All right. So I did a documentary on the similarity and dissimilarities of the Captains, and I called the documentary The Captains. And I did an interview with Chris, whose handlers didn't want him to do the interview, but he was very kind about doing so. He gave me a limited amount of time in which I had to make it amusing or entertaining and get some information from it. And so I chose to put a table and chairs in the middle of a busy road right next to the studio. Downtown, uptown traffic going on. I put a table and chairs right in the middle and arm wrestled in the middle of traffic. Just to make him feel comfortable. And then talk to him. And he's beautiful. And he spoke so well. And he's such a good actor. He's so good looking. And so talented. He's going to be around for a long time. So I'm very happy that he's playing Captain Kirk. They're writing or finished writing the third movie. I have no idea what's going to take place, except that I know he'll be wonderful in it, and I'm very glad that Star Trek is still popular, and I'm able to come out and see people like yourselves. You know, I'm here because I love to entertain, and I do a one-man show. Not and I opened on Broadway in a one-man show, and then I toured the United States, and I had toured Australia and Canada before that. Part of the reason, doing a one-man show and entertaining people for close to 2 hours is like the biggest challenge in show business, I would think. To keep people entertained, make sure that they're listening, and you have something interesting to say is a real challenge. And there have been many people who have been laughed off the stage and severely criticized, and you leave yourself open to that because you can't. Well, it was the actress, you know, the lousy show was because she was so bad. I'm just sorry that it was. I did my best, but she was terrible. You can't do that. It was terrible. Oh, I guess that's me. So I was lucky that I got good reviews and things weren't so long. I think I came to Indianapolis. But all that, to have the courage to do that was a result of things like I do here. Over the years, telling stories and entertaining, I had the ego build enough to think that I could manage it, and luckily I was able to. I'm also here to tell you about things that I'm doing and things that I'm not doing. For example, this, and some of these have to do with show business, some have to do with just the creative urge that I'm still out there attempting to create in all areas. I helped design a watch that did very well. The watch is very popular. Right now, a company in Chicago, American Wrench, is building the prototype of a motorcycle that I helped design. The story goes something like, I'm at, I think it was a convention in Chicago, and I'm signing autographs. Like, by the way, I will sign after I'm done here at the lonely booth way far away. Bring a map, bring a compass to find the place where I'll be signing. And the guy comes up and says, I'm from a company called American Wrench. We'd like to build you a motorcycle. Hey, okay by me, because I drive motorcycles. I used to race them, and I love motorcycles. Then a friend of mine, so that was a couple of weeks later, a friend of mine who's a sculptor calls me and says, I'd like to do a sculpting of a motorcycle so it could look like it would belong to the Museum of Modern Art. I see it as having these lines, it looks like a horse, and we'd buy a bike and I'd weld it, and I said, wait a minute, I got American Wrench wanted to build me a bike, why don't, and I set up a meeting between American Wrench, my friend the sculptor, and me, in the middle of the country, and we started banding around ideas. Well, a couple months later, my friend the sculptor backed out. He said, I don't want to get other people's ideas, I only want to do it myself, so I'm backing out. So American Wrench and I designed a motorcycle. It's, if you go to rivetmotors.com, you will see the most unusual design for a motorcycle. My intention is to drive it from Chicago to Los Angeles in the middle of June. All that's being set up right now. I'm making a documentary on the making of the bike, and then the riding, figure about 5 days to drive it to LA, and stop off at some cities along the way, maybe Salt Lake City, maybe Denver, Las Vegas, and then Los Angeles, to raise funds at those cities. But the thing is really exciting, to invent a new motorcycle, and you will see how this design is, you've never seen anything like it, and then have this performance art of driving the bike along with others who will be invited, and if you read rivetmotors.com, you'll see what I mean, and have a circle of people go down the highway filming it at the same time and making it a documentary. Could be really interesting. So it's that kind of thing that I'm doing. that I want you to know about. There is a really interesting comic book, but it's not quite a comic book. It's both a novel, which I've already written, called Man o' War. It will become an e-book, so it's a Man o' War e-book. It's also a Man o' War comics. It's also a cinematic graphic novel. The camera will travel along the panels of the comic book, and voice and music will dramatize the story. So it's going to be like a motion picture, but it's also an e-book, but it's also a comic book. But yeah, it's a wow. So it's that kind of thing that I'd like to tell you about as part of being here with you this afternoon.